Hi guys and welcome back. We are not on a riverbank as you can see today. Today we're doing something different. My pal Phil, he actually asked me to share this video on my YouTube channel. So we're gonna do just that. You've seen Phil on my channel before. He's the ghillie on a lovely bit of Tweedswood. He actually helped me with my fishing this season a lot. He helped me with my tactics. He got me lots of tips. He also raised my awareness about endangered Atlantic salmon, because as a trout fisherman I didn't really had a clue. It is a short film about people in the industry who really care about the future of Atlantic salmon. They're trying to change things for the better and they put words actually in action. So enough of me, and let's have a look at the movie. It's really good. You guys should watch it, seriously. Right? Thank you. Let's go.
The river's an incredible animal, you know, and I use the term animal because it's a living and breathing entity, you know, almost 100 miles top to bottom. And really, I would always qualify Tweed as being unique, but of course unique should be a singular, but there's so many unique features about the river.
It's the connection taking you away from the modern world and putting you back into nature. And I think it's never been as important as it is right now in the uncertain world that we live in. My name's Phil. I'm the ghillie at Tweedswood. I've been here for 2.5 years now. I came here from North Yorkshire, where I was self-employed as a landscape gardener, but I had a fishing guiding business on the side, and I guided on a river called the River Ewer for 10 years, where I learned a lot about salmon. My granddad was a keen angler and always used to tell me stories about salmon and sea trout and how many there used to be and how they used to go and snatch them out of the river because everybody was doing it. I can very, very vaguely remember one of my first memories actually, walking down the River Skell to the confluence of the River Ewer, and a massive fish jumped. I can still remember it now. I wonder, as an 8-year-old boy in 1988, was that a salmon? And was that my first ever insight and view of a wild Atlantic salmon? And from then on, my love of fishing grew, and it wasn't long before I caught a 14-pound salmon in the spring, and I was just like, wow, this is just like a thing of dreams. You know, for one, I never thought I'd be able to afford to go salmon fishing, because I always thought you had to be wealthy and, you know, in the know to be able to go and do it. And two, just in awe of a creature that was completely wild. Probably the first time I caught a fish that was absolutely, without doubt, wild. And then understanding the biology of the fish and the migration that it makes, and kind of immersing yourself in finding out more about them. And the more I understood Atlantic salmon, the more I became fascinated by them. And just for that brief moment, when you take yourself out of the responsibilities of modern life, and you turn your phone off, or you leave your phone in the car, or whatever you do, and you just go down on the river, and you just sit and take it all in. The otters, the kingfishers, the roe deer, the buzzards, the ospreys, which we're fortunate enough to see here, the trout splashing about, and occasionally, if you're really, really lucky, seeing a salmon jump. It's at the actual act of catching the fish, in my opinion, and I don't know if I dare say this, as passionate of an angler as I am, is not what I go out fishing for. It's that reconnect with nature and the ability to switch off, relax, and find yourself. I love my job being out in nature, but with the current decline in salmon populations, my role as a ghillie has to change.
over 3/4 of our rivers fail to meet health standards. 14% of rivers in England fail to meet good ecological status under Water Framework Directive. So we're on a downward trajectory. And so we absolutely need to reverse some of the damaging effects. We need to prevent habitat loss and pollution and over-harvesting that's causing these ecological cascades elsewhere.
The Atlantic salmon has been challenged, for a number of years. The River Tweed Commission has been around for over 200 years, and I've got an incredible data set, principally data generated from the Tweed Foundation about that cyclic nature of salmon coming back to the river. I don't think there's any surprise or any question around that downward trend right across the entire Atlantic salmon range.
So the challenges that Atlantic salmon are facing are on a multitude of angles, I think. There's a lot of things happening in the sea that we can't control, commercial fishing, shall we say. There's so much fishing going out there in the ocean that we can't control that. You've got aquaculture, which is always a bone of contention, especially so in Scotland. It provides a lot of people with a lot of jobs, and you have to be mindful of that. You have to be so careful with these type of things because it's emotive, and for me personally, I think the whole industry wants cleaning up. You've got millions of fish in cages, crammed together, often terrible sea lice outbreaks, open sores. That wouldn't be allowed on land. But all the waste of all the fish that are excreting the waste, that drops down 365 days a year onto the bed of the estuaries, and it just decimates the wildlife down there. I don't say don't do it, but I say change the way that it's done. And I think the Scottish government and the UK government at large needs to look at it really now and start doing it in a cleaner way, more efficiently, to help preserve the wild stocks of fish. So when these salmon return from Greenland, the first thing that they probably do encounter as they come home now are porpoises, dolphins. They feed quite predominantly on salmon as they return. From 1990 to now, the seal population has trebled. So that's harbour seals, or common seals, I think as they're referred, and then the grey seals. So that whole population has just exploded. It's hard because salmon have been placed on the red endangered list, and you've got a species that is declining, and then you've got the apex predator going the other way. And you can argue that we haven't maintained our coastal fisheries because we've taken away the food source that those seals should be eating, and it's not their fault. At the end of the day, they're an opportunist. So why should we use seals as a scapegoat? Why aren't we looking at the way we manage our inshore fisheries? But the fact of the matter is, whether you want to agree with me or not, seals are now impacting on salmon populations. And it's a difficult topic to raise. It's a highly emotive subject. It upsets people, but should we now be reconsidering managing seal numbers round the mouths of rivers where Atlantic salmon are returning? And that is a question that needs to be put on the table, and it needs debating. It needs to be. The final thing that these fish need is cool, clean, fresh water.
So in terms of our river, gosh, I would say our river's cleaner than it's been in 100 years. We look back in time, the Tweed mill industry, the cloth industry, would generate different colours of fabrics on a weekly basis. So 50 years ago, depending what day of week it was, that was the colour the river run. It could have been purple or green or blue, but there were tens of thousands of salmon coming back to the river. So it was incidental. If some were lost, and bear in mind a lot were killed then, far, far, far fewer these days. So it's an interesting conundrum that our river is cleaner than it's been in 100 years, but we've got less adult salmon coming back. So there's a real complex problem for us to try and solve. I would say, and most scientists would probably agree, that the climate change and climate challenge is very clear and present, and the challenge that the Atlantic salmon have as an adult is clearly in the North Atlantic. It's not to say that there's not more we can do in the river, despite it being the cleanest it's been for 100 years, we're far more focused now in anything that could be detrimental to the river. And that could be an overflow from a sewage outfall, or it could be a chemical spill. All of those things, we're really sensitive to and react to these days. And part of our enforcement functions around that vibrancy. It's a multifaceted problem that we try and identify the areas where we can make something significant, some meaningful contribution.
Salmon and trout are affected by temperature all the way throughout the life cycle, from the egg stage all the way up to the spawning stage. But the problems with climate change go beyond that. There's more nuanced. There's warmer, wetter winters, which is when our eggs have been laid, and that can affect the survival of the salmon and trout eggs. There's obviously the hot and dry summers. Well, the hot and dry summers has an interaction effect with diffuse pollution, and because there's less water in the river, the nutrients get concentrated, which is perfect for algae growth. And that algae growth, with the temperatures, the light, and the nutrients, blooms into a very big problem. And that also extends to things like macrophytes, aquatic plants. There seems to be a decline of aquatic plants, ranunculus species for the Tweed in specific.
Just last year, the Scottish Government released our salmon statistics on how many fish were caught in Scotland. There was 33,023 fish caught in the whole of Scotland. That's a 25% drop from the year before. 25%, a quarter of the fish. It's not small increments that's coming down, it's chunks. You're not seeing just a gradual decline of fish population, and you're actually seeing these huge drops. And they might come up for a wee bit, and then you're seeing another huge drop. So if it keeps going the way it is, there won't be, it'll take a drastic effect on the fish populations. And not only that, the insect life and, the plant life and absolutely everything around it. It's not just, it's all a loop. It affects everything in that loop, not just the fishing.
So we know from lots of different research that invasive non-native species are one of the top 5 drivers of biodiversity loss on a global level, and they cost the British economy nearly 2 billion a year. The Tweed is a designated river. It's very, very important, both in the UK, but also in a much wider sense. And bankside vegetation makes up a large sort of area, and a reason why it's also important. So lots of biodiversity live in the bankside habitats, and it's important to keep those as natural as possible. So removing invasive non-native species is definitely something that can improve the river habitat. So in order to carry out the aims and objectives of this project, I've got lots and lots of volunteers up and down the river who give us a hand with the practical works of removing some of these invasive species. And Phil is one of my very dedicated volunteers who gives us a hand.
Our job now is to maximise the survival of those salmon parr and everything else. I'm not taking away from trout and grayling and all the rest of it, but we're focusing now on the demise of Atlantic salmon. Though every single fry is precious, every single fry potentially is a returning adult. So we need to focus on looking after these fish, and we can do that in multiple ways. So again, water quality, predation, and also the way we manage the habitat. So in years gone by, for example, all the riverbanks would have been trimmed, they would have been cut, the grass would have been immaculate, it would have looked absolutely stunning. Fabulous for the angler, you can just walk down the river and cast away, but it's no good for the fish, it's not providing insect life. So now, for example, since my boss has bought this beat, Harold, we both agreed that we're going to leave the grass alone. So now what we do is trim ins and outs for the anglers so they can get to the riverfront, but everything else is left wild. And in the 2.5 years that I've been here, I've seen an increase in voles, shrews, butterflies, absolutely mountains of butterflies that you never used to see. That in turn, as we saw last night, has introduced barn owls back onto the beat. So the whole system, from just leaving the grass alone, has generated insect life, small mammals, and now we're having barn owls working up and down the beat on a night time. And that has come from leaving the grass alone. Simple, isn't it? But you're putting nature back into balance and leaving nature be how it wants to be. So that's a fantastic thing. Now what happens there is you get a windy day like today, it blows the insects out of the tall grass into the river and it feeds the fish. So you're giving these juvenile fish things to feed on. Secondly, what we've done on the beat, plant thousands and thousands of trees. Again, on the main stem of the river, that's not going to help with the temperature, because a lot of tree planting is done in the tributaries to try and create dappled shading, which is basically, as global temperatures go up, maybe a degree or two, hopefully we're going to try and reduce the temperature of the river by a degree by planting lots of trees in the watershed, which kind of balances things out. But on this beat, what we're trying to do is re-wood, replenish, rewild the beat to provide more and more shelter and insect life. And you have a completely clear riverbank, there's nowhere for these poor little things to hide. So we're kind of going back to try and leaving it as it was intended and as nature intended.
Well, we've tried and, we try and do our small part here and there. I mean, helping Phil with all the planting. I was weeks up there planting trees. Just along there, I was helping him a couple of weeks ago planting on the braes. And, that will definitely help keep the water cooler once these trees take hold. But that's going to take years and years for these trees to grow to a height where it'll provide enough shade and enough insect life to cool down the water. But we're going to need definitely massive input from the whole community.
The River Tweed Commission, fundamentally, is a body with statutory powers. We deal directly with the Scottish Government. I represent both the Commission and the Foundation on the Wild Salmon Strategy Implementation Board. So it's working with the high-level politicians to ensure we've got policy support for the rivers. It's absurd to think that the proprietors, the owners of each individual stretch, should fund the conservation of an iconic species like the Atlantic salmon. I wrote a number of years ago, an article called Polar Bears on Tweed. These animals are as iconic and more endangered than polar bears, yet we seem to be so blasé about their existence. We live, delightfully so, within Scotland's border country. Almost every principal town has one of the tributaries running through it. The young people should be very aware of the fact that this iconic animal is in their backyard and is rarer than polar bears. So that ownership, that community engagement is something that we're really keen to extend. So from the top, talking to politicians, and at the bottom, talking to local communities and making sure that we've got ownership of the situation.
I think the last newsletter we got, salmon fishing brings £24 million into the Tweed Valley. That wealth comes from the city very often, or now post-COVID, a lot of American clients are coming. Everything is revolved around that fish. It is so important. It's such a keystone of the community, the environment and the economy. It's part of the heritage of Scotland. You think of Scotland, you think of red stags, you think of whiskey, mountains, fresh air, clean rivers and wild Atlantic salmon. It's an absolute icon and it has every right to be there. One thing I'd like to get across as well is ultimately why I'm here right now is because I'm passionate about fishing. I'm passionate about fly fishing. I'm passionate about Atlantic salmon and the benefits and positives that this sport brings. And although we're living in a world now where it's no longer about having more fish to catch, it's about actually saving them, full stop. In the last 30 years, 35 years, salmon numbers are down by 2/3. And at that rate, we're looking at potential extinction in 15 years' time, 20 years certainly. That can't be allowed to happen, shouldn't be allowed to happen, and as far as I'm concerned, won't be allowed to happen. How do you get people to care? And I know I said before, if not me, or another gillie, or a community, then who? Who's going to do it? No one.
There is always hope. There is always, you know, if we band together enough and do our little, everybody does a little bit, that'll add up. But it's not about the talk, it's about the action.
And now I look at the future and I think how fortunate I am to have been able to do what I have done. I want that to happen for my children. Jacob has been fortunate enough to catch an Atlantic salmon on Tweedswood, as has Finley. He caught a fish when he was 8 years old, but they love it. They love coming here, and seeing my son catch a fish and then win the Beamerside Trophy, which he was awarded last year, is such a proud dad moment, I guess. But removing children from technology and putting them back into nature, they just revert to being kids, running up and down the bank, laughing, giggling, and catching a fish, loving the moment and enjoying it. It's just so special. I want to have left a legacy where my son can do what I've done and his kids can do the same, and so on. We live in a world of like instant gratification where we want everything now. But when it comes to the wild, we can't treat it like that. We're going to have to plan ahead now and put trees in that our grandkids might benefit from, and certainly make changes to the river to protect the salmon. And you can still be fortunate enough to sit on the riverbank and see a salmon leap. Will you be able to do that in 15 years' time, 20 years' time? I hope so. And I hope that goes on and on and on into the future, so they'll always be there, like they have been since the last ice age. And it's our responsibility, all of us. The salmon should always be there, and it's our job to make sure that they always are. So as a passionate angler, hopefully as long as I live, I can enjoy casting a fly and having that anticipation and expectation of catching one of these magnificent creatures.
To me, the river's like a place that I can escape, because it's like a place in the countryside without any problems I get to enjoy fishing with my dad and my family.
So we need to take this fight now, and we need to take it for the future and for future generation and for this iconic species, Atlantic salmon.